So I was casually browsing the CSL engine ranking and guess what I found? Torch version 4 and it is sitting at number 2 in the world, only about 10 euro points behind Stockfish 17.1. But Chess.com has not publicly launched Torch version 4 yet. They have only officially released Torch up to version 2.0 in March 2024 and integrated the engine into their analysis page back in October 2023. In this video, we are reviewing a head-to-head game between Stockfish 17.1 and Torch version 4. Let's see which engine really resigns supreme. We have Stockfish 17.1 with white pieces and Torch version 4 with black. Stockfish started the game with pawn to e4. Torch plays pawn to c6, Caro-Kann defense. Here most common move is pawn to d4 because it is controlling 4 squares of the center. Black plays pawn to d5 here. Now in Caro-Kann defense, white has mainly 3 options to play. White can either take this pawn, white can either push this pawn, and white can either support this pawn. If you let's say take this pawn, then it will come on advanced variation. But let's say you support this pawn, pawn will take, you take back, and it will come on fantasy variation. But Stockfish plays pawn to e5, advanced variation. Torch plays bishop to f5 for attacking this pawn and also controlling this square. Then pawn to h4, pawn to h4 is not an engine move because it will give space to king. Black also goes for same plan, and here Stockfish plays pawn to c4. Now the point of pawn to c4 is attacking this pawn, and this will break this pawn chain, which is good for white. Here Torch plays pawn to e6 so that it can develop his bishop and support this pawn. And you can see Torch is making a pyramid structure. Knight to c3, putting double pressure on this pawn. Knight to e7, knight to g2, and knight to d7. All knights are developed now. By the way, Stockfish played knight to f2 instead of knight to f3 because it want to play knight to g3 and attack this bishop. So knight to g3, bishop comes to g6 square, and then bishop to g5. This knight is pinned now. Torch goes for queen to b6, putting pressure on this pawn. Here most of us will think for protect this pawn by either pushing it or putting our queen to d2. But Stockfish plays rook to c1, queen takes, and then bishop to d3. Pawn to f6. Now black plays pawn to f6 because it is attacking this bishop, which is supporting this rook, which can be attacked by this queen. Anyway, pawn to f6 and then pawn takes back, and Stockfish bring his bishop back to e3 square. Then bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and pawn takes pawn. Queen takes it, then knight to d5. Knight to d5 can attack this bishop and can take this rook, but Stockfish take that knight, pawn takes back, and then queen back to this square. Then bishop b4 check, long side castle. Here Stockfish plays rook to b1. Torch cannot take this pawn, otherwise bishop will gone. So it goes for knight to a3. Then again rook is attacking on queen, queen on a4 square, and king to g1 square. You see Stockfish is doing castle manually. It will bring his queen on h2 square, and then it will develop his rook, which will put pressure on Torch king. Pawn to b5, and Torch calculated this is going to happen, so he plays pawn to b5. Now if it take, then it will take it back. Now rook can't take because pawn will take it back. Bishop on f4 square, king b7, king s2, rook on open file, and then rook on c1 square. Stockfish targeting that pawn which is supporting these two pawns. Bishop on f8 square because this want to bring his knight here and go for a fork. Knight takes pawn and giving support to this knight. Torch goes for rook to e4. Double attack on this pawn and also attacking on this bishop. Queen on c2 square, also double attack on this pawn. Rook goes to c8 to protect this pawn, and then pawn to g3, making the pawn chain. Knight to b6. If you are thinking this pawn is free, then you are wrong. Because let's say knight takes, rook takes, and pawn takes, and queen here. This will break the whole pawn structure of white's king side, which will develop a serious threat. So Stockfish noticed it and goes for bishop to e3, supporting this pawn and this pawn. Now here rook can't take this bishop, otherwise pawn will take and all pieces will be safe. Then bishop to a3, attacking on the rook, rook to b1, and then bishop to e7, supporting this pawn which can be attacked by this knight. Then knight to g7 and king to a8. And knights come on f5 square, attacking on the bishop and making plan for pushing his pawn. Knight to c4, attacking on this bishop, rook to h1. Now rook to h1 is like a backbone for this pawn. Now no pieces can attack this pawn until rook is protecting it. Knight takes bishop, pawn takes knight, bishop on f8 square, and king on g2. King on g2 because I told you earlier that rook is protecting this pawn. Pawn to c5 because the rook can't protect this knight his entire life. Pawn takes and rook to c4. Queen back on b1 square, double attack, and black pushed his pawn. Rook back and rook takes pawn. Then rook on f1 because if white didn't play this move, then black can push this pawn and also can attack on this knight and this pawn. Queen to e8 square, attacking on this pawn. Queen to d3, supporting. Queen to e5, and after some move later, bishop takes. A normal player will capture this bishop, but Stockfish plays rook to d5 because Stockfish no Taj can't protect this pawn. Otherwise, Stockfish will play rook to d7, double attack, and it will capture the queen. That's why Torch play king to b6, takes, rook on c2 square so that it can trade, but Stockfish play bishop to d6 check, king to b5, and check again. Black prevented by rook to c5, and Stockfish give check again, queen to c4, rook takes rook, queen takes queen, and rook takes rook. And after some move later, Torch resign this game because this queen only worth 9 points, but this rook worth 10 points, and also Stockfish has 2 points extra. That's why Torch relied and resigned this game. Thanks for watching.